Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Page, and I'm Dean at FIU Law. And I am delighted to welcome you today to a discussion with Danny Rivera. And Danny Rivera is particularly special to us as he earned his JD from FIU Law in 2009. And more than that, he is a double Panther, having earned his Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering at FIU in 2002. Now, currently, and I'm probably going to mangle the precise title, but currently, Danny Rivera serves as the president of the division that is responsible for Meineke Car Cares, which is about an 800 franchises of car repairs, and in addition, an oil division, Take 5 Oil, of which I believe there are about 500 franchises. So Danny Rivera is the president of this division. The division is one of Driven Brands, which is a holding company owned by private equity, and the holding company owns a variety of other automotive aftermarket related brands, such as I think the most prominent is Mako, which apparently does 50% of auto painting in this country. Driven Brands, the analogy that I drew up, it's sort of like Restaurant Brands International. That's the holding company that holds Burger King and Popeyes and Tim Hortons and maybe a few other restaurants. So Danny's role is to run this division. Before that, he had a couple of other roles at the company. And before that, he worked in a variety of, really big name companies that everybody's heard of, such as General Electric, for example, or AutoNation. So I am absolutely delighted to welcome Danny Rivera to our discussion today. And in particular, we're interested in finding out what it's like to be a corporate executive and how you went on and chose this particular career path. And perhaps if we could start with, I guess we could call this a softball question. I'm sort of interested in terms of your upbringing, how you were raised, sort of sports, instruments, interests, and how that might have a bearing on your subsequent career choices and successes.
Yeah, awesome. First off, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me. I appreciate doing this, and I appreciate trying to give back. Feels like at least it wasn't too long ago that I was on the other end of this screen planning out my career, so I'm happy to give back. And I think, Dean Page, you did an awesome job actually describing Driven Brands and who we are. So that was great. Thank you for doing that. Sure. So I think from an upbringing perspective, I was probably your pretty typical Miami boy, I guess. So my parents are Cuban, came from Cuba in the 50s and 60s with nothing. So I'm first generation American. And went to, by way of schooling, I grew up in Miami Lakes. So I went to Miami Lakes Elementary, Miami Lakes Middle, HML, Hialeah Miami Lakes High School for 2 years. And then for my last 2 years, I went to Westminster Christian. And that's ultimately where I graduated from. And the big reason for that was at the time I was playing baseball, which sports was a big part of my childhood. And I think a big part of who I am today, just by way of work ethic. So my baseball years taught me a lot about working hard, about teamwork, about leadership, about trying to accomplish something together with a group of people. So my last 2 years, I was playing high school baseball, went to Westminster where we won a national championship and a state championship. And it was a lot of fun before coming to FIU. So I gotta believe that my background is pretty similar to a lot of the folks that are at FIU. Mostly public school upbringing, first generation American, Cuban parents. Just kind of worked hard.
Fantastic, and of course, work is one of the common denominators for success at law school. I'm always telling law students there are no shortcuts. You absolutely have to work. In order to succeed. Let me ask you a little bit more. You mentioned baseball and teaching you teamwork and that sort of thing. Would you mind talking a little bit more about baseball? I know you played for the FIU baseball team for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I spent 2 years playing for FIU. I actually, it's kind of an interesting story, and I'll wrap it into kind of the bigger topic, which is careers. So I played baseball my whole life. So had you asked me as a kid, what did I want to be when I grew up, I would have given you two answers. One would have been a Major League Baseball player, which I still think that was what God intended for me, right? But that didn't work out. And then the second one is I would have told you, depending how young I was, I probably would have said I wanted to own a computer store. So I always had this love for computers. And my first computer, it was an Apple II GS, which I got in elementary school. My mom was kind enough to get it for me, and I taught myself how to program on that thing at the age of, I don't know, I must have been like 9 or 10 years old. So I always had those two loves in my life. Baseball got me through. So from a teamwork perspective, I mean, think about team sports, it's all about goal setting. So I remember being at Westminster my last 2 years of high school. We were a very good baseball program, nationally ranked. And the coach kind of made no bones about it that our goal was to win a national championship. So even as I think about my leadership today and how I approach things, even lessons that I learned back then, right? Setting a clear goal for a group of people. We're going to win a national championship. That's the goal. Now it's about, so what do you have to do to achieve that? And how do you work amongst a group of people to achieve that? Because I was a pitcher growing up. I could be the best pitcher in the world, but the fact is, if we didn't get any hits and score any runs, we weren't going to win any baseball games. So how do you kind of lay out tasks and goals across a team, knowing that everybody has each part that they have to do? I couldn't hit for other people. They had to do their part, but then I had to in turn do my part. And there's this kind of greater good or this greater goal that we were serving. Going into college, I actually got recruited to play at University of Miami for the Hurricanes. So I actually started my college career at UM for a semester, got recruited to play ball over there, and then got cut, which was interesting. So failure is certainly something that I think is important in everybody's life. So that, when I think back, that was the first time in my life that I had failed, right? I had been, frankly, successful at kind of anything that I wanted to do. I was a good baseball player. I was a good student. And I'd gotten recruited to arguably one of the best programs in the country to play baseball, and now I'm cut. And they wanted me to go to junior college. And I was like, okay, well, I'm getting an engineering degree, so I'm not going to junior college. So I transferred over to FIU to play ball for FIU. But that was the first time in my life where I had to think about, okay, I'm probably not going to be a pro baseball player, which is okay. What am I going to do with my life? Where do I go from here? And that was the first time in my life that I really just started to take my career, as a student, but thinking about my career outside of baseball and taking that very seriously.
And thinking beyond simply owning a computer store.
Yeah. At this point, I wasn't a kid anymore. So that's when I started. I mean, once I got into college, I immediately went into engineering. I knew I wanted to be a computer engineer. I still had a love of computers. So that happened immediately. I immediately went into engineering. As I progressed through my engineering career, I started to develop a love of leadership, and then my career kind of shifted.
Okay. And you say a love of leadership, and you mentioned with the baseball team how the coach said our goal is the national championship. Is that sort of what inspired you in terms of leadership as something you wanted to pursue?
Honestly, it was a couple different things. I think probably the first thing that inspired me was other people. So look, quite frankly, with my upbringing, I mean, I was the first person to go to college and graduate with a career. And I think from my family's perspective, meaning, my family, not my wife's family, being a successful engineer and doing that would have been great. Like that, you made it, so to speak, right? It was really when I got introduced to my wife and my wife's side of the family, and then to some mentors early in my career where people started to say things to me like, you may be dreaming a little bit too small. And folks started to instill in me this confidence of, somehow I could maybe accomplish more, something that I had never really thought about. And then once I started to embrace that idea that, like I can accomplish more, maybe some folks seem to think that I have more to offer, that I started to take that more seriously. And then as I started my career, the second thing that happened is you start to lose these kind of bad connotations with words, right? So for example, when I first started my career, my corporate career, I was at GE. I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 22 years old. My wife and I had just been married. And had you asked me at the time, I would have said that my career goal was to be like a chief technology officer, which all that basically means is it would have been in engineering and IT, which is where I started my career. It would have been a leader of people, but it would have been a very technical role. And the reason I would have said that is because I perceived leadership positions as being highly political, and political with a very bad connotation, right? Like, you don't do the real work, you kind of just finagle results, like all these bad connotations that I think people have of what leaders and executives may be when you don't wear the shoes. So I had these connotations. As I developed in my career and I started working with people and I started working on corporate teams, I noticed, number one, I was better at it than I thought. And I think it's human nature to enjoy things that you're good at. And the second thing that I think started to happen was all these connotations, these bad connotations went away, right? So I didn't see the job as political anymore. I saw it as working with people to accomplish goals. I didn't see it as, brown nosing or whatever, like this kind of upward management kind of stuff. What I saw it was, no, you're actually just held accountable for delivering results, and there's a lot of fun in doing that. So as I got exposed to it, all these bad connotations went away, and the good connotations started to fill the void.
Okay, so I hear a couple of things here. So in terms of mentors really helping you to sort of lift your goals and have bigger goals, which I guess I see sort of an irony if your goal had also been to be a professional baseball player, which is a pretty competitive goal.
Yeah.
And then sort of rethinking your whole views on what leadership or management actually is, away from the sort of the political side and more in terms of just how does a team achieve a goal and how do you lead a team to get there.
Yeah, that's 100% right. And mentors, to your point, has played a big part in my life. And I think most of the things that I've tried to do have been more on the offensive, right? So like, how do I try to bring about a certain result? And I've sought out mentors throughout my career. One of them may be listening in the webinar is Professor Fingerhut, one of your professors there at FIU Law. So Scott and I continue we stay in touch even to this day. But as I think back, there's been a handful of mentors in my career that have really either taught me to dream bigger, or B, gave me practical advice about how do you achieve things and how do you accomplish certain goals.
Okay, and you use the phrase you sought out mentors. And I'm sometimes asked by students, or junior people in their career, how do you find a mentor? There are often structured mentor programs. We have them at the law school, but you use the phrase sought out. How do you go about seeking out a mentor, or how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, just ask. I mean, I remember having the same question, when I was a student. In hindsight, now being an executive, the nature of, when you've accomplished things in your life, chances are somebody helped you along the way. And chances are that you're more than happy to give back, right? So if you take me as an example, I mentor several people today, some of which I've sought out because I think highly of them, some who have sought me out, and I've never said no. And every time I've asked somebody to mentor me, they've never told me no. So I think the first thing is looking for the right type of person, right? So that can be either A, somebody that holds a job that you want to hold one day. That could be B, somebody that has a lot in common with you, or you have an immediate commonality. And therefore you have a rapport, or it could be the opposite of that, which I've done sometimes. I'm an introverted person by nature. I've sought out at times people that are the opposite of me, because there's skill sets that I have to develop that if I just surround myself with people like me, I may not develop, right? So I think it's just being clear on what's your goal, what are you trying to accomplish, what are you trying to learn, finding a person that you think can teach you that, and then it's as simple as asking. I've never been told no. I think most people are very genuine with their time, and they're more than happy to help.
That's great, and that's similar to what I tell students as well. But I'm really pleased to hear that no one's ever turned you down.
Not
That's
yet.
fantastic. Hey, if you don't mind, if I could turn a little bit towards, here you are progressing. Okay, professional baseball hasn't worked out, but you're working at big companies. You have a computer engineering degree. You have marketable skills, and yet you decided to go to law school.
Yeah.
What prompted that shift?
Yeah, awesome question. So I'll start everything with, for me, everything in my career always started with a goal. So by the time law school came into my thinking, was my goals. I had already been working for a few years. I was a director, I believe, at Burger King in the corporate office there in Miami in IT. And my new goal now, as I continued to develop my career, was I wanted to be a CIO. So CIO is Chief Information Officer. It's the head of IT. It's an executive level position in IT. And so one thing that I've tried to do in my career is to distinguish myself. So the easiest way I could explain it is, if you think about a product, and I think it's easy if you think of yourself as a product, you yourself are a brand. You have to sell that brand to other people in your career. So if you think about any brand in the world, you think about a car. Marketers for Ford go about talking about that vehicle, right? And they're going to talk about what are the pros, and they're going to highlight things that distinguish that vehicle or that product, right? So, you should buy a Ford F-150 because it's the best truck in the road and most towage, blah, 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 all these reasons, right? So I've always thought for myself, what do I put on my resume that distinguishes me? And so honestly, the way I got into law was, I knew I needed an advanced degree if I wanted to compete for a CIO job. So the nature of advancing in your career is, it's competition, same as baseball, right? It's just the higher up you go, the more, the better the competition, right? I mean, you're talking about the best of the best people that are moving up an organization, and you have to distinguish yourself across this group of really talented individuals. So I knew I needed an advanced degree, and I had two options really. One was to get an MBA, and one was to get a law degree. At the time, I was practicing IT security, so there's a lot of relationships in IT security with law. And I frankly thought that an MBA was a little bit me too. And I don't mean to disparage MBAs at all. I hire a lot of MBAs actually. But it was very, very common for an IT aspiring executive to have an MBA. It was not at all common for an IT executive to have a law degree. And it was just that quiver in my cap, and it worked like a charm. I mean, every interview that I had, it always came up, oh, so you're a lawyer. Oh, so you're a lawyer. It was something that just distinguished me immediately. And the skill set that I learned as a lawyer are completely applicable to being an executive. So it was a great marriage.
And I don't take offense. I have both an MBA and a law degree, and I agree with everything you said, especially about the skill set that one develops as a law school, at law school and later on. So how did you find law school? I believe you did your legal education part-time. Was engineering helpful for this? How was it to do the shift back to school and in something that's pretty different from computer engineering?
Yeah. So the engineering was super helpful. Look, at the end of the day, I spent very little part of my career being a true engineer, meaning like, I'm the one creating widgets and things like that. What I always tell people is what engineering taught me was how to systematically solve problems. So whatever the problem is, you're taught a very precise way of, this is how you approach a problem, this is how you solve a problem, this is how you keep the solution in place, how you control kind of after the fact. So I was taught a very robust way to solve problems. That skill set is applicable to anything in life. It doesn't matter what you're trying to do. Life, certainly from a career perspective, is mostly about solving problems. Whether they're business problems like, we're seeing 30 cars a day right now in our quick lubes and we need 35 cars, or whether it's, build out Bluetooth technology like when I was at Motorola, that was something that was going on. As far as the transition back to school, it was difficult. One of the things I used to get asked all the time, so if I go back to my days in law school, I was a director at Burger King, probably had about 50 people reporting through me, married, just had my first child, or my wife had the child. I participated, I guess, as best as you can as a man. So we had just had our first child. and I'm going to, law school at night. And I used to get asked all the time, like, how do you do it? And the first thing I used to tell people is I don't ask myself that question, right? If you start to ask yourself how you do something, then you start to create excuses why you're not going to do it. So my mindset was, this is what I'm doing. This is my reality. So all of my focus was just on how do you get the task done versus, how am I accomplishing this? It was hard. Really what it came down to is just being very organized, right? And very intentional about my time. So when it was family time, it was family time. And I was very intentional about that. When it was school time, it was school time. And I just had to very much compartmentalize my life and be very organized about my time is really what it came down to.
So it sounds sort of like we sometimes talk about how success in law school, well, and success in life, it's really all about time management. That's the one thing for all of us that's finite. And it sounds like you had time management on steroids, having to balance work and a new child and law school as well.
100%.
But and would that be sort of the single most important key to your success at law school, do you think? Or is there anything else you'd add?
I think it's a great question. I think maybe it's three things come to mind, and maybe it's not just law school, but just accomplishing things in general. I think number one, goal setting. I've said that a few times. For me, everything starts, one of my kind of sayings in life, it's actually the motto of our company, is dream big, work hard. I think everything starts with a dream. What are you trying to accomplish? And there's no wrong answer to that, right? You could want to be the best engineer in the world. You could want to be a CEO. You can want to be anything in the middle. It doesn't matter. The question is, what is it that you're trying to accomplish, and being clear with yourself about that. Because once you set that dream, that informs a lot of things. That clears things up. So when students or mentees of mine or anything like that ask me about how do you, like what path I should take or anything like that, the way I try to answer that is, look, first you got to tell me where you're going. So I'll give you this example. If you tell me we're in Miami and I want to get to Orlando, right? That's your goal. I can tell you exactly how to get to Orlando, right? Now, along the way, if there's some kind of an issue, I'm going to take the turnpike and there's an accident. I know you're still trying to get to Orlando, so I can give you kind of plan B, plan C, and plan D to get to Orlando. If you tell me, if I tell you where are you going and you say, I don't know, I don't know. I mean, I guess then my answer to you is there is no wrong answer, right? Like get in the car and drive. I can't really give you a lot of guidance because I don't know where you're going. So I think careers and accomplishments are very similar. So number one is being clear about what you're trying to accomplish. Number two is hard work. And to your point about time management is spot on. I mean, time management and hard work to me go hand in hand. So being very specific about what you have to accomplish, what time you have to accomplish it, and being organized. And then the third thing I think is just having the right people around you. So for example, I won't go through all the people in my life, but my wife, I mean, I couldn't accomplish anything that I've accomplished without my wife, right? So at the end of the day, when I was in law school at night and it was tough, she had it harder than I did with, one kid at home screaming and, she's working as well. And I'm off in class with a bunch of adults and she's, sitting here with a kid. And by the time I graduated, we had our second kid. So it's about having people around you that enable your goals and that help you.
Okay. If I may, if I just push you on one sort of aspect of that, you mentioned sort of having goals. And I guess I think in terms of what you said, where you had this goal or this dream, not to harp on it, but of being a professional baseball player, and then you get cut. And basically you have to recalibrate and reset your goal. Any sort of, was this any sort of advice or suggestions as to how you might do that? I mean, obviously some goals prove to be unachievable.
Sure. No, that's an awesome question. And it prompts me to talk. So it's a great question. Having a goal, I think sometimes when students hear that or when younger folks hear that, there's this implication of like, there's one goal and it never changes. That's not at all my point, right? So I think that's a really good clarification. At any point in my life, if you had asked me when I was a college student or 5 years into working or today, I've always had a goal. The goal has been different though. So Danny Rivera, who was fresh out of college, had you asked him, hey, do you want to be a president of a huge company one day? my answer would have been no, like straight up no. Like, no, I don't want that. That's not my goal. Thank you. I'm good. I had a goal, but that wasn't it. And as I progressed in my life, my goals changed. So I think to your point about how do you choose goals, so talking about Major League Baseball for a second, choosing a goal, I think, is A, being aspirational, but B, being realistic with yourself, right? So baseball for me, I was a pitcher. I threw 83 miles an hour top. If you know anything about baseball, you don't make it to the major leagues throwing 83 miles an hour, right? That was just a physical limitation that I don't care how hard I worked, I couldn't overcome that. So at some point, you have to be realistic about, I just can't achieve that, right? But it's a fine line. You have to be aspirational, right? Because on the other hand, had you asked Danny Rivera, is it possible for me to be a president of a big company right after graduating college? I may have thought that was not possible, and yet here I am. So I think it's at a point in time, A, have a goal, and B, given the skill set that you have then and your opportunities and everything else, you have to believe that it's achievable. And I think life will take its course as you achieve certain things and you advance. New worlds get open to you and you start to see things as, well, I thought that was impossible, but it's not so impossible anymore. And then you change your goals.
That makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you, so you brought up, so now you are, as you say, you're president of a really big company. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is like? Most of us have not been and probably will never have the opportunity to be president of a big company. I'm curious, what's it like? What's your day-to-day work like?
Yeah, it's interesting. So probably the easiest way I can explain it is it's taking in a lot of information from a bunch of different people and making decisions, and then being okay with the idea that as you move up in corporate life, the reality is that you are held accountable for the work of others. And that's a hard transition for a lot of people, right? So if you think about every career basically tends to progress the same way. Your first job is you're kind of an individual contributor, right? You're assigned tasks, you're basically in charge of those tasks. Your success or failure in that is largely as a result of your work, right? Like they're fairly small, not small in terms of unimportant, but small in terms of you're doing it. As you move up, the common denominator is I'm responsible for 2,000 people's work, and it's indirectly responsible. So I get held accountable for a bunch of work that other people did or didn't do. And so that's hard. That's a hard thing to do.
I'm hearing you mentioned having the right people around you. If you're accountable for their work, this sounds highly applicable there too.
Highly applicable. As you move up, you learn it's all about people. At the end of the day, people are the most important thing in any business, in any organization, and you live or die by the people that you choose to surround yourself with. So it's really interesting. I love what I do. My typical day is a bunch of meetings on a bunch of topics that I'm not an expert on, that I'm trying to bring in a bunch of information from experts, and I'm trying to apply my experiences and my logic, things that I learned in law school and engineering, right? Like, how do you solve problems in a systematic way? How do you apply logic to a set of facts? And how do you come about with what you believe to be the best possible decision? And the reality as a leader, what I've found through my years is the problems that come to you, it's not that they're hard problems. So it's not a factor of how difficult the problem is. It's a factor of how ambiguous the answer is. So what I mean by that is you can have the hardest problem in the world. If there's a very clear solution that's clearly right, somebody will make the decision because it's a safe decision to make, right? Like, we're going to put a man on the moon, super hard to do, but there's one very clear way to do it. Somebody will make the call. The things that come to me are the ones that it's a 50-50. There's two ways to do it. Either answer presumably is right. There's not a lot of data that suggests one way or the other is the perfect answer. So those decisions tend to percolate because somebody with the gall, so to speak, or the brass, or whatever you want to say it, has to make a call. And so those are the decisions that tend to come to me. And 9 times out of 10, there is no right decision. There's just a decision that has to be made because otherwise the organization's paralyzed.
Okay. So that also, I suppose, if the 9 times out of 10, there is no right decision, that presumably takes some pressure off you as well.
Not at all.
Not at all,
No,
no.
no, because you're still expected to deliver an outcome, right? So I'll give you an example. We just, for our Take 5 business, we just went through a pretty big change in marketing strategies. And when you talk about something as big as a marketing strategy, marketing, I don't know if it's a bachelor's of science, but I can assure you there's a lot more art than science to it, even to this day. And there's not a clear answer about how to best market a product or a set of services. So we made a pretty dramatic shift based on a bunch of facts and data, but ultimately nothing pointed to this as the answer. It's just, there's a few different answers and I'm going to pick this one because I think it's the one that's the right one. Happened to work out and we're doing really well, but I promise you, had it not worked out, I'd be in trouble. So the pressure is not relieved.
So maybe in a way it's worse then, since there is no right answer and you don't know if you found the best answer and you don't know what the results will be and your future in some ways depend on it. Maybe there's just a whole lot more pressure.
That's right. I think that's right. I mean, the hard part about being an executive that isn't really talked about is, number one, like I said, you're relying on a bunch of other people. You don't really do the work. And some folks see that as like a demeaning thing to an executive, but it's not your job to do the work. Your job is to lay out plans and strategies and to enable people to do the work. So letting go of control is hard, especially since most people that move up in their career, they like control, right? Like most accomplished people, even if you think of students that are, your top 5 GPAs, they're probably type A people that are controlling and know they put out good work product and are happy when they're at the driver's seat. As you move up and you have to relegate control, that's uncomfortable. And yeah, the pressure to deliver, ultimately, like I'm responsible to deliver profits and sales and all the things that businesses are supposed to deliver. Nobody asks me how I'm going to do it. I'm held accountable to make it happen. And I don't get the excuse of, well, hey, profits weren't where they were supposed to be, but let me tell you why. It's like, nobody cares why. I'm supposed to deliver results. So that's hard.
Right. You mentioned a couple of times about people and, how you're accountable for the work of other people. So how do you go about, and I think this is relevant for almost everybody. You don't have to be a president of a company to be involved in hiring. How do you go about picking the right people for your team?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's really hard. I'd be lying if I said I've figured this out. I, to this day, have still made hires that I didn't make the right hire. I think practically speaking, it's kind of a 2-part answer. Number one, typically as a leader, you don't pick your team, you inherit a team. I think you're new as a dean to the school, right? Relatively new. I mean, there was people there before you got there, right? So part 8 of the thing is you inherit a team. And now the first thing that you do typically as a leader is you figure out who are the players and who are not the players. Typically the things that I look at is I like to ask a bunch of simple questions. I like to understand what makes people tick. So if I ask like a fairly innocuous question, like, hey, I just met you, I inherited you on my team, welcome. Tell me about the thing that you're most proud of accomplishing in 2019. Seems like a fairly innocuous question, but it gives you a lot of insight into a person, right? Depending on what they answer, it tells you what do they think is important, what's worth talking about. Is it something that actually improved the business, or is there some other motive that drives this person? So I think number one is figuring out with the team that you inherit, who are the players. I think number 2 is, as you progress as a leader, the whole concept of a network, right? And holding on to people that are stars, right? So if I think about when I first got promoted into management on the business side, coming from IT and from technology, one of the biggest struggles that I had was, if you had asked me to run an IT organization somewhere, I had a whole network of people that I had worked with that were stars in my eyes that I could bring over immediately. Now I'm running a business. I didn't know any marketers. I didn't know any operations people. I didn't know any supply chain people. So I didn't have a network to pull from to say, great, I've got a marketing problem. There's this stud person that's a great marketer. Let me bring them on. So as you develop your career, you want to keep that Rolodex. That's an old, outdated term, but kind of this network of people that have proven themselves and are good, and you want to bring those people along with you. And that begets like people helping people. So if I look at my current role now, my boss, who's the CEO of Driven Brands, I met him, when I was 5 years out of school at Burger King. And he saw in me a person that had potential, let's just say, and remembered me and called me 10 years later and brought me on to do some work, and I grew my career, right? So it's a lot about tracking who are good people, keeping them in your network. And then as far as interviewing, honestly, Dean, I think it's kind of a 50-50. I haven't figured out the whole interviewing thing. I tell people, I think in a 30-minute interview, I could probably make you believe I'm the Pope if I wanted to.
Well, I'm happy to say you're right. I have been here 2 years. Of course, people at universities tend to stay a long time, but I've been very fortunate to inherit a very good team. So I completely understand that. Let me actually ask you one more question before I address. We've got at least a couple of questions coming in from participants here. But let me ask one question. What then would you say, if I can turn the question on you, what sort of achievement over the last year or year and a half have you been most proud about?
That's great. Let's see, in the last year and a half, I'd say probably the most, it'd be how the business and how we've overcome kind of this whole COVID situation. So COVID, I mean, obviously it's something like we've never experienced before. I've been working for a fair amount of time now, and I've never been through something like this. As a business and as a team, I am really proud of how we've come through that. So we had some pretty dark times there in April. We were down pretty significantly. We're back, completely back. We had to let go of a lot of people. I had to lay off over 2,000 people back in April, which was just a business necessity. But fast forwarding to today, the team that we kept rallied. We made it a rallying cry that we wanted to bring back the business to a point where we could rehire all these people. So, when you do a layoff, you don't want to do a layoff. It's kind of a business necessity, but we wanted to recover the business as quickly as possible to bring as many people back as quickly as possible. If you look at today, we actually have more people post-COVID than pre-COVID. So
wow.
Yeah.
So seriously, so you have more people July 29th than you had, say, February 15th.
That's correct. That's correct. And it's just because the team, that rallying cry around, we want to recover this business. Our culture, I think, is phenomenal. It's thanks to our people. And that rallying cry around, we want to recover this business because we want our friends back. We want our colleagues back. We want to be able to grow the business, because growth of a business means growth for individuals if you do it right. So it's creating wealth for individuals. It's giving them a way to sustain their families. And so it was super interesting to see how it played out, and that we were able to accomplish that.
Sounds great. And, that's an encouraging story, especially with the bankruptcies and layoffs and all of the uncertainty, which of course we feel deeply in higher education, the uncertainties about what impact coronavirus is going to have.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm just going to, there's a couple of questions that we've received through the chat that I'd just like to ask before we wrap up. And incidentally, if any of you would like to, there's the Q&A button. You can just submit questions there. But one question is just to do with your future goals. In other words, where do you go? So you're president of a big company that is a division of a private equity owned holding company. What are your future goals? What might be next?
Yeah, great question. My last goal, I think, as far as my corporate career is concerned, is I'd like to be CEO. So basically have my boss's job. And that's nothing more than, I think there's things in your life that you want to see them through, that you want to try it and see if you could be successful at it. And so that's what's next for me. Hopefully it's within the company I'm at, but let's just say before I retire, I'd like to have that job.
Okay. So I'm inferring from that then that there's, like presumably it would be easy enough to spin off Meineke into a separate company, and then you wouldn't be president, you'd be CEO or reporting to a board, presumably. So I take it then there's significant differences between that and reporting to the holding company CEO.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. So you can't substitute when you're the CEO. The differences would be, to your point, you're reporting to the board. There's strategic decisions that are above, quote unquote, my pay grade, right? So if we wanted to acquire a new division, as an example, that's not my opinion may be asked, but that's not my call. So there is kind of another realm of stuff there that I'm not responsible for that I think would be interesting to have under me at one point.
Understood. A second question, and I think this is particularly relevant for some of the people going through law school, and perhaps at least stereotypically some younger people. Question about work-life balance, and you mentioned earlier that you were able to compartmentalize, and if you were spending family time, it was family time, and so forth. The question would be, well, what does work-life balance mean to you? And I guess related to that, if you have any advice as to how to avoid burnout while progressing up the ladder.
Yeah, happy to. I'll start with the second one first and then go back. So the burnout question, I think burnout, the way you avoid it is you have to have hobbies outside of work that you enjoy. So I have hobbies, I have things that I do, not just being with my kids and coaching their baseball teams when we had baseball seasons pre-COVID, which I took a lot of joy in, but I have hobbies as well. So you need to have something that's not work to occupy your time and something that you find fun. Otherwise, you never disengage your brain, and I think that's how you get burnout. So just having things outside of work that you find enjoyable. The first part of the question, remind me again,
was what work-life balance means to you, or how you achieve that?
Yeah, great question. I'll tell you something that a mentor of mine told me early in my career, and I don't necessarily subscribe to this, but it was funny. He says, look, the problem with work-life balance is the word balance implies 50-50, and that's not how it is. So that's kind of interesting. The way I think about work-life balance is it starts again with what's your goal. So if you want to be a professional baseball player, you want to be the 1% of 1% of athletes. That comes with a sacrifice. So the word balance is kind of weird, right? So if you draw a pen, like you want to accomplish this, and the implication being that somehow this other side is also going to be here. That's not how life works. If you want to accomplish this, something gives, right? It's the same thing with being an executive. If you say you want to be a CEO of GE one day, top 10 company in the world, that's extreme. So that comes with somewhat extreme sacrifices, right? So I've always had big goals. Number one, I've been aligned with my family and my wife around those things. And number two, then what I try to do is just be really effective with my time. So my career takes a disproportionate amount of my time. It's not 50-50. That's a decision that I've made. But when I'm with my family, I'm with my family, period. So I just carve out the time that I need to have effective time with them and to spend time with them. So yeah, I think if your career goals are less lofty, so to speak, then obviously you can be more lofty on the personal side of things. But I think life is about give and take. There's no perfect scenario where you can accomplish the 1% and not sacrifice for it.
Yes, understood. And this, I really do like your point about balance implies 50-50, and yet that's unlikely to be the case for almost everyone. Let me just ask one other question here that's come in terms of, again, this is going back to sort of law school and law school courses, and you've talked a bit about how some of the skill set you develop in law school has really helped. Are there any courses in particular you either took that you thought were particularly useful, or courses that you wish you had taken? The sort of, I know accounting for lawyers often comes up among people in in a more business role. Is there any sorts of thoughts about this? Granted, we're 11 years out from law school, but anything that sticks out in particular?
There's two that stick out in particular. Con law, so not con law, contracts. Sorry, not con law. Con law is not super. It's super interesting, but not very applicable to business life. Contract law was a great course. Probably not for the reasons that you might think. It was more about dispelling myths around what do contracts mean. So a simple example, like a layperson thinks that if I drew up a document and said, I promise to give you $100 and I sign it, that's a binding contract because it's on a paper and it's signed. And of course, you and I both know that there's no consideration and therefore that's not a contract, right? So really practical things like that business people really don't understand. A lay business person thinks that, man, if we said it, it's in writing, it's in an email, it's signed, that must be a contract. And given that example, I could give hundreds of examples of just demystifying what really truly is law versus what is the semblance of law or your ability to persuade somebody maybe that it's the law. So I think contracts are super practical. And then I'd say, moot court, which I'm trying to remember if I took a course around that, but I took that, I participated in that with Fingerhut, which by the way, I think he's still at the university and he's phenomenal. And that course for me was just around how do you defend an idea verbally, right? So at the end of the day, moot court was about, hey, there's this legal issue and you're spinning up kind of a series of arguments around why somebody should rule in your favor. That is hugely applicable to business, right? That's basically what I do for a living is here are the facts, here's what we should do, and here's why, and I have to be able to defend it. So if you marry kind of the problems solving stuff that I learned in engineering with the persuasiveness, articulation stuff that I learned in moot court with Fingerhut and law school, I think that was a really powerful combination.
Understood. And I am so happy to hear you say that about contracts. In the event that FIU law if we don't achieve our goals and I go back to being a professor, contracts is the class that I'd go back to teaching, I hope. And I really enjoy that. Well, at this point, we've gone a little bit over the sort of 45 minutes here. But I'd really just like to thank you, Danny. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I think there's, at some point you might want to write one of those management books with, the sort of the distilled essence of the wisdom that you've accumulated on things like the importance of goal setting, of time management, of resetting goals. I think it would be at least as good as 80% of the management books that I've looked at. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and explain your career path. In particular, I also really appreciate your words on mentors. This idea that you shouldn't be shy to ask, and it hasn't happened to you, but the worst thing that happens is they say no. Right. And it sounds like it's much more likely that they'll say yes. So thank you very much. I found that really, really interesting. And I think it should be really helpful for our, not just our attendees live, but also those who click through on the recording.
Great. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for asking me. And thank you, Jasmine Grant, for planning this whole thing behind the scenes. She was phenomenal.
Absolutely. Jasmine, incidentally, is among her one of her key roles is relationships with alumni and alumni development. And Jasmine consistently does a fantastic job, and full credit to Jasmine. This was absolutely her idea. I think after talking to you a few months ago, she came to me and said, he'd be great on one of our recordings.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
I don't know if Jasmine is still there, but she's absolutely right. In any case, well, thank you very much. Thank you for participating. He hasn't said this, but I'm sure if you had other questions, if you just emailed them to me at apage@fiu.edu, I can get them to Danny, and I bet we get a wonderful response